Thank you all for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, so a note to our internet audience watching at home. If you're interested in tonight's book, we will ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. Just call the number on your screen. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to present Mr. Kent Russell and his new book, I Am Sorry to Think I Have Raised a Timid Son. Mr. Russell is a journalist whose essays have appeared in The New Republic, Harper's, GQ, N+1, The Believer, and Grantland. This is his first book. In it, he records his quest to understand, through his journalistic subjects, his own appetites and urges, his persistent alienation, and, above all, his knotty, volatile, vital relationship with his father. He gives us a haunting and unforgettable portrait of an America and a paradigm of American malehood that we've never seen before. Please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Kent Russell.
So, hey guys, how you doing? Thank you all for coming out here. It means a lot. I feel loved. It's nice to be home. As you see, I got way too much sun at the beach today. I refused Jeanette's offer of sunscreen because I wanted to soak in all of it before I go back to New York. And I would feel remiss if I didn't unbutton and show the love of the Coral Gables. Go Cavs. Go Cavs. I guess I'm going to be reading for you guys for a little bit. You've all heard my voice before. I know you hate it. I'll try to do as good as I can. I thought maybe it's kind of an interesting structure, this book. If you guys end up reading it, it's some pieces that I've done before, and we're kind of trying to fit into a book originally, as well as some interstitial stuff that kind of works as the ligature that ties the whole book together. And so I think for one of those things, I'm going to read to you guys about Miami because you don't know anything about that. So, all right. This is actually from the interstitial stuff is kind of modeled after a trip I took back to my folks' apartment 2 years ago now. They live in the Bay Area, so they have sold our old house in the Grove. I tried to go back and see it last night. We were not able to, anyhow. Okay, so here we go. The Bay Area is nice. Mom and Dad's apartment is nice. Nice in the way that any place that is not your home, that you will be leaving directly and are not responsible for, can be nice. The new technocracy hovering above us in app-chartered helicopters, I'm sure that the capability is extant within their slouched physiques and post-human Delphine psyches. They, too, think it's nice. But it would be incorrect to say that I miss the big old house. You couldn't pay me to spend a night there alone. Especially if it somehow reassembled itself like the House of Usher in reverse. I wouldn't so much as lay my head on the now empty lot. You know, take away the headstones, it's still burial ground underneath. We called it Russell House. I have no idea why. We like the musty ancestral connotation, I think. Vaguely mead holly. A warm place to hunker down, wait for Grendel. It stood in a hammock, which is an environment where things live and die so quickly and often that they create solid land out of swamp. At points in its history, our neighborhood, the Grove, was favored by key deer, Bahamian laborers, hippies, and drug lords. The roads aren't straight, they knot neuronally, and the place is forever shagged with fronds, ferns, and nooseless braided vines. A golden grout of sunlight makes it through the fretwork, but you can't see the ground for the crushed berries. There are no sidewalks. The last time I visited, I saw that our street had only 4 listing old Grove houses left. I went around and counted. The rest were now typical Miami homes, gated and garishly painted. Their yards were defoliated, as if to keep clear the owner's lines of sight. Aside from leased luxury sedans, these homes are the smallest units of what the city's made up of, its atoms. If public life depends on sympathy, and if sympathy means being able to say, your issues are not my issues, but I want to understand what they are and respect them, then I cannot say there's a lot of public life or sympathy in Miami. That seems harsh now, but...
Bravo.
At the end of our street was a small park that fronted the water. This is where Dad and I would play ball, sometimes for an audience of Mikasuki who had come to the park's freestanding chickie hut to get lit. After October, migrated Midwestern vultures would roost in the trees, like committees of bald scholars blackly hunched. Every other month, we'd find a beached makeshift raft there. These inspired Karen and me to attempt our own escape. Amid some spousal tiff one day, the two of us inflated a pool lounge and took covered tennis rackets for oars. We made it as far as the channel marker 100 yards offshore before our craft sprung a leak. A single gull was sitting on the marker's piling, and a skipjack flashed out of the water, chased by some predator. The waves pushed us back. When the sea returns from Miami, that park is where it'll start. The end of our street also happened to be where, through some quirk of meteorology, people's celebratory New Year's bullets rained down. I'd find the flattened shells in the soft earth next to crab holes. I kept an old cigar box full of them, would scoop and tinkle them through my fingers like doubloons. To grow up there was to confront vitality and spontaneity with all that entailed. Every dead thing a sacrifice. Such a beautiful place. What was not beautiful, however, was Russell House. Structurally, she was a single narrow story that rambled down a hill, or what passed for a hill in Miami, like an architectural landslide. Quite the heap. There were 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, several small staircases of 2 or 3 steps, a pool full of dead leaves and water bugs, tile and carpet, wet bar in the master bedroom. The facade was poured concrete, bunker thick, surrounded by a 6-foot wall of same. Aerating it were a lot of poorly sealed plastic windows and French doors. There once stood tall iron gates at the end of the driveway, but these rusted off their hinges and were left to blanch in our trash-strewn backyard. You guys know that. We had no garage, but we did have the shed and the canopy. The shed was originally conceived and built by Papa as a 7x6 playhouse for Karen and Lauren. They got to use it 3 times before Dad turned it into a dog food, lacquer, and scrap lumber repository, shot through with spiders the size of baby hands. The canopy was a tent designed to keep a van out of the elements. It was filled with tools and curios. Then, over time, snakes. Finally, a family of feral cats. She was not watertight, Russell House. Rock caused the kitchen ceiling to sag to head height. Tree roots grew through the walls, becoming structurally integral. When it rained, which was almost every afternoon, ochre water dripped into buckets at the rate of bagged saline. Character, Dad reiterated whenever a newer house went up on the empty lots around ours. They were Mediterranean revival compounds, neo-eclectic superstructures, Art Deco mansions, each bigger and more expensive than the last. Whereas your home, it's lived a life, he'd say, roping down the American flag that flew on a tall pole within our walls from sunrise to sunset. On the bus home, classmates would see this flag sopping limply in the humidity, and they'd wish me and my sisters, adios, Americanos. Inside, the overwhelming sensory impression was fungal. Russell House smelled like damp transmigration. Thinking back, I wonder, is that why we took so many naps? Why we all staggered through adolescence, logy as fuck, black mold? Whatever it was, it made me imperceptive. With my close neighborhood bud Ricky, for instance. Dennis, you remember Ricky. Ricky was a well-fed Panamanian with a mushroom cut and the eyes of a ruminant. We'd been fast friends since his family moved in up the block. We played in the same baseball league, shared a third base coach who'd sing, "Let me ride that donkey if you tripled." After school, we'd kill hissing invasive lizards with sticks. He seemed to have a million different uncles, these sallow-eyed, lipless men who'd take us deep-sea fishing. But one warm December day in '93, I found out he was moving, a thing he did often, apparently. He invited me to a combination housewarming / New Year's party his family was having. His new place had high walls topped with sharp fleurs de lis and first-floor windows decoratively barred. Cocked quizzically above a steel door were 2 security cameras looking like air quotes. Welcome. Dozens of guests had already arrived. Everybody was in finery, kids included, in excellent gaucho boots and gowns that swooshed and riffled. The action was around the pool, 50 feet long with a swim-up bar at one end and a fake rock cliff at the other. Normally, Ricky's mother floated about the house in what now seems to have been a heavily narcotized state, bathrobe unbelted, ponderous fake breasts very hard to ignore. Here, though, she was chastising the Incan-looking help in moneyed Spanish. Ricky's dad I'd never actually spoken to. I was told he worked as a salmon fisherman in Alaska. Now, though, he was across the pool in teak-colored lenses, laughing among a murder of brickish dudes in suits. He was beaming like the newly convalescent. All the guests were smiling like that, like they just beat something. They seemed to have done it together, or at least were complicit. Everyone knew everyone and was toasting something. What it was, they weren't saying. A DJ spun Grupo Nietzsche salsa. The mood was such that people were jumping into the pool, shoes and all, and swimming up to the bar. Later, Ricky's dad smashed one of the caterers' faces on that pool bar. Something about weak drinks and not keeping up with demand. He swung over and started pouring generously. He clinked glasses with another of my friend's dads, Roberto's, a contractor who built all or part of the new house, I'm not sure. He was a real jocular guy, Roberto's dad. Practically every time I stayed the night at his house, he'd have his associates and friends over, electricians and landscapers he slipped jobs to. They'd go into the den to drink and smoke cigars, fuck around, talk a little business, things I imagined I'd do as a grown man in Miami. He's in prison now, Roberto's dad, for fraud. Just the other year, I learned that Ricky's dad was a Noriega Coke lieutenant. He lessened his sentence by becoming a federal informant. He and his family were in the witness protection program. My own father found out but never mentioned it. His suspicions were confirmed after a sleepover when he called Ricky's dad and told him, "I have your son here. How do you want to do this?" One gravid pause later, Ricky's dad said, "What is it that you want?" "To get rid of your son?" Dad said, suddenly wide-eyed and cognizant. Asked later why he didn't say anything. "God damn it, Dad, I could have been blown up with their Chevy Venture." He responded, "Shit. Everyone was getting well back then, myself included. Who do you think built this place?" When the new year ticked over, the male guests at Ricky's new house fired rounds skyward. I jumped into the pool too, drank cups of fountain coke, and ruined my rented tuxedo. Russell House was herself purchased out of bankruptcy from an associate several degrees removed from Ricky's dad, an international coffee importer. Strange shit was certainly afoot in there. For instance, there were way too many phone jacks. Phone jacks where there should be no phone jacks. In the attic, under the carpet, deep inside closets. Add to that the several false walls and the rooms with non-Euclidean geometries. The angles in my own bedroom did not add up. It was painted a jaunty teal, but still it felt like some Lovecraftian gateway chamber. Not least because a bricked-over door to nowhere stood at one end, occasionally seeping this oxidized ooze. I would not be surprised to find that, in its blueprint design, Russell House was less an architecture than the diagram of a psychic event. All of us but Mom were absolutely certain that something was hidden in there with us. Treasure, or maybe worse. Periodically, a hive of bees would appear in the living room chimney. The next morning, they'd be littering the floor in their death throes. Violent midnight thunder showers often caused the electricity to cut out. When the lights came back up, there'd be a dozen blue crabs slowly suffocating in the shallow end of our pool, their pincers up like dukes. After Hurricane Andrew, when the pool was drained of detritus and storm-surged baywater, a dorsal fin, then a caudal fin, and finally a shark's lifeless snout dawned at the bottom like the worst realization. We were broken into and ostensibly ransacked 3 times. Only once was anything taken. Karen and Lauren on this. Of course that dump was haunted. Karen, the worst juju was in your closet. Lauren, oh fuck yeah, your closet. Dad, when we were cleaning out the house before selling it, I went up into the crawl space above your closet. Eerie shit, man. I was not comfortable. All the wood up there, it was like brand new. Blonde, firm wood. Remember, that was underwater during Andrew. The thing about a haunted house is its narcissism's friendly confines. A place where time passes slowly, if at all. Where you grow more and more obsessed with your own sordid past or problems. The past itself becomes the specter darkening your present. There, you screw inward instead of growing outward. You're caught in an endless repetition of neurosis-driven thought and action. There, you have setting as psychological pathetic fallacy, a palpable disease you drink in unconsciously. Strangest of all at Russell House was an outdoor bust of Bacchus. Not the cherubic Bacchus you usually see. We're talking aged Bacchus, leathery in the face, his grape leaf wreath come undone. Bacchus through the ringer. His eyes looked skyward, and his chin was tucked into his neck. His hair was matted, and his thick lower lip hung ajar, grouper-like. He looked indescribably pained, or else about to barf. His bust was affixed to a back wall, on top of a hollow, coffin-shaped plinth. Our meter reader thought he was the devil. Another guy refused to clean our pool because he feared we were Levian Satanists. To combat this, young Karen X'd out Bacchus's eyes and scrawled, "I love the Lord," across his base. The only thing that for sure ghosted around that place was Dad. Russell House's animating spirit. He was there when we woke up, there when we got back from school, there when we went to the kitchen to fix a midnight snack. Though by then he was usually passed out in the recliner with the lights off, the TV on, and the shadows of muted snow flurrying across his face. From the day after he lost his job to the day I went off to UF, a closed loop of character who was not exactly pleased with his new plane of existence, but who was resigned to existing intransitively now. Although, unlike most ghosts, he did not want anyone to uncover the crime that had created him. Jesus, no. He does not want a proper burial for his bones. I recognize that was a little quicker than I thought it would be, but whatever. So, yeah.
Plenty of time, yeah.
Any comments or questions?
Here, let me get to you with the microphone. Here you go, sir.
Yeah, well, Ken, it's a great book. I read some of it, and I think I just wanted to say a couple things
Sure.
and ask you. You know, the title is so awesome,
Yeah.
and I think it also goes to a misunderstanding about your relationship that you described with your dad in the book, because the guy who said that is actually like a major league asshole. And I didn't realize
Yeah, no,
what an asshole he was.
Right.
But your dad didn't want that for you at all.
No,
and
yeah,
that's-
he's the greatest dad in the goddamn world. Excuse me, but for those of you who don't know, that it's not like something that my dad had actually said to me. The title of this book is actually taken from Daniel Boone, who was the famed American frontiersman and like the person like by far most people in this country like want to claim descendancy from, and it's actually taken from a moment when he's the guy who like discovered the Cumberland Gap and like opened up the country when it was just all clinging to the eastern seaboard, like, and he was like what started the great kind of western migration, the great kind of manifest destiny idea. And so a lot of people consider him like the father of that kind of like frontiersman ethos that you're going to be self-sufficient, you're going to be like radically self-creating, that kind of thing. And the title comes from, he had all these sons, in all of these exploits that he went on, he would like inevitably get them killed. And one of them he was out west, and it was during the Revolutionary War, and he was telling his son, there was a battle upcoming, and he just said, I heard them, beating up for volunteers, and I didn't hear your name called, to volunteer. And he says, I'm sorry to think I've raised a timid son. Whereupon the son, whose name was Israel, actually is like, God damn it, and goes and, signs up and is just promptly killed. And Daniel Boone has to bury him in a mass grave. So, yeah, that's where that comes from.
Next question, raise your hand. I'll get to you with the microphone.
Come on, guys.
Questions or comments?
Now's your chance.
It's always a little tough at the beginning.
Hey, Kent, I read your piece, your interview with Pitbull,
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
and I thought it was phenomenal. And
Thank you.
you seem to have a real connection with him. Maybe shared similar backgrounds and stuff. What was it like meeting him and spending time with him?
It's funny that you mentioned that because that was actually the last time I was here for I think ever, or well, since coming back here. So, that was kind of my last glimpse in Miami. But no, what was most interesting about meeting him and why I wanted to write about him a little bit, although it's not included in this book for thematic reasons. But what kind of captivated me about him was this idea that, you guys remember Pitbull, Welcome to Miami, all that stuff where, there were I don't know about you guys, but for me that kind of captured, it felt nice that somebody was saying the real Miami's over the bridge from Miami Beach and all this other stuff. And so I thought it was kind of an interesting juxtaposition between this guy who himself had started out as, kind of a grittier character and speaking this kind of here's how Miami, the real Miami outside of Miami Beach, outside of this tourist construct exists. And then, he's pivoted himself into this kind of completely anodyne, contentless, terrible music maker. The way that he was able to do that while still remaining in his deep core this same guy, very much the same kind of guy you'd see smoking cigars in a friend's rumpus room and making handshake deals. And I got to see all that with hanging out with him, and in fact the way that total orientation towards nothing but the deal and the business end of things, even with me, obviously with me, trying to make that kind of impression, that kind of avuncular, we'll do whatever we want. So, he made sure that when I was flying with him back from the Latin Grammys and his plane back to Miami, at that time he had his own branded vodka. I believe he still has it, and his own kind of energy strip, which was like a Listerine pocket pack, but full of amphetamines or something. I'm not really sure what it was. And you'd put it on your tongue and it would dissolve. And yeah, so he's the consummate kind of figure that just makes the way that anyone who's charismatic just makes you feel as though you're the only person in the room and can focus the attention that way. And so yeah, we're putting the Listerine pocket pack amphetamines in his vodka on the plane and losing our minds. And he's trying to make sure that he gets done what he needs to get done. And just that idea is almost a conceit in some ways, at least for how I have understood Miami historically, where this place, ill-gotten or not, kind of rose to a certain prominence and is now very chrome and billowing white curtains and everything, and it kind of at heart still remains Miami. So, but yeah, it was a time hanging out with Pitbull. It was a time. Haven't had a hangover that bad in a long time. Long time.
Who's next?
Hey, Kent.
What's going on, Liz?
I kind of wanted to touch on this idea of misidentification in Miami, or maybe
Okay.
just lack of identification. I think if you're from Miami, you probably do feel that. And so how you feel, because you just said that you were only here when you interviewed Pitbull, which was a
Right.
while ago.
Yeah.
And yet Russell House is a
That-
huge theme in your book.
Yeah.
So Miami is a huge theme in
Yeah,
your,
for
your
sure, yeah.
life. So how is it to be back? And how is your identity in New York, if you don't mind?
Oh no, for sure. I just wanted to say also that it was funny that you used the phrase "I want to touch on that" because when I get to lead that workshop at Columbia now, and that's how every student begins every comment. So I thought that
I should
thought
be
that-
at Columbia.
you know,
That's
well,
what you
when
were
I
saying.
when I decide to finally make my millions and write my like erotica series to capture the imaginations of everyone.
We can touch on that.
Yeah, it's gonna be workshop themed erotica called "Let Me Touch on That." But no, it's a very interesting thing because like I mean if like you leave this place and like live anywhere else for a long period of time, like outside of Florida, you guys know I never lived anywhere else until the end of UF, and going up there, you kind of realize like, oh man, like everyone thinks we're like America's Australia, like like we all like on the internet they've got like Florida Man now and all that other stuff, but like I wasn't aware of that. I don't know if you guys were aware of that at the time, and yeah, so we're kind of like seen as this kind of insane, both a backwater and like a border place where all these things are like meeting, and kind of mingling in like a crazy way, all like suffused with this kind of ambition and like kind of very American like strive to make it and then not make it and whatever. So anyway, like all that was, or make it, but all of that was it was very interesting to me to like leave that place after living in Florida for so long. And then, for people, like I remember, I went up there to go to grad school, and my very first class, like a teacher was like, we had to do like an in-class writing exercise and then read them aloud. And she was just like, listen to his southern accents. And I was just like, what? So like, yeah, there's like a lot, like no one actually kind of understands anything about Florida outside of Florida. And the idea that like South Florida is itself like its own like third separate Florida was like not something that anybody, or if they had like gone there, if they had like grandparents and then they would go like, wintering, the concept of wintering, like in like Hallandale or something, they would have this idea of all of us as wearing like pointy dress shoes and like shirt unbuttoned to here and, just kind of like that whole oye bro kind of thing. So like the idea that, like what I most got from people is like, you're from Miami? I didn't expect that at all, because everybody has like this idea of like a Miami person in their head. And I think that that's like, do you guys remember that like meme with the Heat lady just flicking off Joe Kim Noah? Like that's like what everybody kind of thinks of. From what not everybody, but that's like what I got outside of there. So yeah, no, it ended up being like this kind of insane pride thing after a while, where it's like, that's my home. And in the same way where like if you have like a crazy relative who maybe some people think is like inappropriate or crazy, when you're like, you can't badmouth like Uncle Jerry, and Uncle Jerry's my family. And like that's how Florida kind of, in Miami especially, came to feel. But yeah, it's people don't, they don't get it, but like you're saying, now that I'm back, like I don't even get it anymore. Like this place like moves so insanely fast that like now yeah. No, well, I mean, I'm just saying like all this stuff, like Jeanette was driving me around and I just wanted to see like what now has popped up, like what's been torn down and all this other stuff. And it's just, yeah, Diana, good point. It's not at the same rate as New York, but it's always like that, the same kind of, reinvention or kind of like whatever, aspirational. Everything seems like shinier now somehow, but anyway, yeah.
Who else wants to touch on that?
Everybody.
Thank you. How do you decide how much of yourself to write about versus how much to describe, and how do you bring that out in your students? How much do you encourage students to bring out themselves versus describing the other?
Right. No, that's a good question. There's a great book by Vivian Gornick called The Situation and the Story, and I like try to get the kids to read that because that was like super formative for me, at least, where it's like, no one actually cares about like me, about like, somebody who's like necessarily writing personal narrative. Like that's not, it's very hard to be compelling and be, in a way that can move somebody in the way that everybody aspires for art to move them in that way. And so, yeah, in this book, The Situation and the Story, the idea is that like, there can be like a situation where, like I go meet Pitbull, or like it's a memory of me and one of my best friends growing up in military service and stuff like that. Or like that can be inherently interesting in and of itself, but there's always, if not always, but you would hope that for it to be good, there has to be like the actual story there, which is like, the story of like Miami's ascendancy and its shift into something else, or the idea of civic duty and like this patrilineal masculine tradition or something like that. So rather, like in terms of how I approach it, this book was all very much, I wrote this book when I was working at Yeshiva University in the sub-basements as like I think I called myself like a factotum cum Shabbos goy in the book. But like, I'm like down there, and it was great. It was the best job I ever had, but it was like I worked, and I had time. It was part-time. It wasn't full-time, but it paid well. And I got like a lot of holidays and, summer breaks and stuff. And so this book was born out of the idea of kind of going out and finding and reporting on and reflecting on like the questions about both myself, my family, my dad, certain questions that I had and wanted to kind of suss out. So the idea that like how much of myself I involve in it, it's not as though this was necessarily like a cathartic thing or like writing as therapy or something like that. But I always try to think of it as like a way of, if I have kind of a specialized knowledge or a certain kind of knowledge that maybe not everybody has, then maybe I can bring that out and then use that, like I was saying, as like a prism to kind of open up some wider ideas. So, like, again, like my dad never asked for this. He, doesn't ever want to be written about. He's the most private, wonderful guy in the world. But, I thought that in some way, there was something to be said about this without it being like this kind of, here's my beating heart, like understand the human condition through me kind of thing, but rather a way of, kind of splitting that light beam into its constituent colors, and so you can kind of get a better look at it. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that after this, like, I'm probably not going to be writing a whole lot about myself because who cares, number one, but also like, but that's not to like discount it. That's certainly not. But like, I felt that these were the parts of me, or like when I do write about myself, they were chosen as parts that could then, keys that could unlock certain things. So. It's not meant to be like a tell-all or anything like that,
Who's next? Comment? Question?
Hey Ken, how's it going?
What's going on, Oscar?
I haven't. The book came out within a week. I got it on Amazon last week, so I haven't read much. But the
Okay.
beginning, you dive into your friend Ryan. I just wanted to know: was he aware? Is he?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And what are some of his thoughts? Has he reacted to
No,
your piece? It's very interesting.
That was like the first thing that I ever like was able to like get published in like a wider kind of journal, magazine, whatever. And yeah, you guys know Ryan, some of you. And yeah, I let him read that piece and let my dad read that piece beforehand. Like journalistically, when you do something, like you never do that, it's just like, that's like the worst part about it. If you guys ever read The Journalist and the Murderer, there's the very first kind of sentence there, Janet Malcolm says, like, basically this is a confidence game where, you gain someone's trust. Well, you don't gain their trust, but like you're going to write about them, you're going to tell their story, and you kind of have to work as this almost like charismatic foil to them, and you're kind of like a dummy, but you're taking all the notes and whatever. And then there's always like this moment where like the dowager wakes up and the young man is gone and all her jewels are missing. Where it's like you wake up and like that's not the story I thought I was telling, So, but like that's like more journalistically. But in the case of that piece, definitely let him. And with all this, I gave the galleys, to my family and all that. Like it's not. My family is in there, but it's not like everybody had a say in it. My sister Karen was greatly concerned, but she's concerned about everything. And and he was very supportive. He just asked that his name be changed. I split the meager, like the pittance of money I got for that from N+1 and Harper's. I split with him. So yeah, it was totally like I told him that was the idea beforehand, and he was totally into it.
Anyone else?
Come on,
Go on,
guys.
Mitchell, I'd like to give you first, sir.
Came all the way down here for you.
It's a long drive from Key Biscayne.
Yeah.
When I first saw the reviews for your book on Amazon, I was bewildered.
Yeah, not a lot of love there.
No, and
No.
I was surprised, first of all, because I know how brilliant you and everybody in your family are.
All right, Dennis.
But the fact that it was conveyed as this picture of modern masculinity, and I thought about your dad and his many pearls of wisdom. What is your favorite pearl of wisdom from your dad?
Oh man, well, as you know, as you've heard them many a time, it boils down to two, and it's don't get married Or like, get married eventually, but only after you've done everything that you desire to do or, would like to have done. Because, again, that's always what can be misconstrued about that is, it's like a callous, insane thing. But, what the actual meaning there is that, like, once you have this creature that is like it exists outside of you, and it's like having your heart removed from your body and is there like beating in your arms, and like thereafter, like regardless of what you want to do, what your interests are, they lie in this thing, and in protecting this thing and loving this thing and like giving this thing whatever opportunities it can have. So in the same way that his pearls were always couched in a kind of kind of jaded or kind of not mean-spirited, but kind of gruff-seeming,
Comical sometimes.
yeah, comical, to always comical. But yeah, and that was always the thing where it was like the in the way that a lot of that posturing of like, yeah, and even when in writing this, when people would say that, like the marketing people would be like, it's an examination of American masculinity or something, I'd just be like, what? It's in some instances, but yeah, in the same way that idea of being like a radically self-sufficient person or like a tough guy or like you don't need anybody, whatever, that in and of itself is born of this idea that like were you to like actually like open up and like it's like a fist, and if you open up that fist, like then what's there? All you can do after you open that up is like take the other hand, and then that like fist doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, like that one was always born out of that idea that like be as bad of a person as you want to now, because there will like come a day where like you have to grow up and like be an adult and like be a loving human being. And then the other one was I won't say what it actually was because it sounds worse when you say it out loud, but it was basically just like head on a swivel, just always head on a swivel. Don't get taken off guard. You know the one I'm talking about. Watch out for the X. But the idea being that like it goes back into that, like the vigilance is an aspect of when you're ready to be like that kind of open or loving or whatever person, like that's on you. Don't get like caught off guard in some kind of way. But yeah, no, his pearls of wisdom are always fantastic, and in the way that like it can almost be aggravating, where like you have that kind of like it's your dad. You're like, come on, Dad, come here. The world's changed. You don't know anything, and then like it's just like that. Actually, you have to just be like, damn it, he's actually right. It's like that's just correct. So yeah, he's always spinning those off.
Thank you, sir.
For those of us who don't know Ken, what was it about the Russell house that created such creativity in the whole family?
Karen's Karen, it was always going to be Karen. Karen just would walk around reading whatever, the stovetop stuffing box, whatever she could pick up. Karen, it was always very clear that she could kind of almost disassociate and be in her own invented world, regardless of where she was. So Karen, I think Karen was just, that was always going to happen. I think in general, just about that place, our middle sister Lauren, we all agree is the smartest Russell by far, and the kind of strongest and best one. But like I think basically like our dad is just the consummate storyteller, as Dennis was saying. He's like a total rake, total raconteur, just the funniest guy in the world. And as I kind of wrote about, he was just like the phenomenal dad that he is. He was just always there, always the voice that we heard first thing in the morning, last thing before he went to sleep. And he's just telling jokes, telling stories. Very oftentimes the payoff would just not be worth it. They'd just be the shaggiest dog stories in the world. Karen and I like to think that that's why we spin our wheels so much and just don't get to the points, because we have to hack through, like the verbiage. But yeah, no, I think like more than anything, our sensibility was like shaped by that dude. He acted as almost like this semi-permeable membrane through which like the outside world would first be filtered. And like I was saying later, like it's either like that was really true or that wasn't true, but that was very much like the first kind of way to approach everything. So I think whatever good or bad could be said about us, is we owe that guy. He was the best.
And then what's next?
Ha!
Do you have a novel coming? Or?
No, oh God, no. No, that's actually the thing is, like people will sometimes be like, how does it feel, your novelist sister or whatever. The desire is not in me to do that. I tried to do it once and it was just terrible. I can't actually like create things, spin them out of nothing. I need to actually go get the grist, mill the grist, bake the cake, whatever. However, I don't know how you do that, but clearly I don't. But yeah, and no, this is the thing that I love to do the most is actually like go out and find true stories and like, try to make them relevant in some other way and things like that. Like in December, I was in like Papua New Guinea, just like trying to write about something there. So it's always going to be that kind of stuff, I think. Not always, who knows, but like that's like first and foremost the bread and butter for me. So
Kent, do you?
What's that? It's always Brooklyn, huh?
So Kent, do you seek out an assignment, or do you make the sort of assignment and then?
Well, in the case of this, everything was like for instance, the Pitbull piece for GQ, which is not in here, that was very much a thing that was an assignment, where they were like, you want to write about Miami, how about you write it through this guy? Everything else in here, like I was saying, I was working that day job at Yeshiva University, and, it was a great job. I didn't have much to do. But I'd be thinking up certain things that like I was saying I wanted to explore or look into. So for instance, there's a piece in here about a self-immunizer, a man who takes deadly snakes and slowly inures himself to their poison. Until like when I went to visit him, he could withstand the bites of practically any snake on the earth. And the idea from that kind of sprung from why am I and a lot of people so attracted to the aphorism, that which doesn't kill me can only make me stronger. And so it was like, well, let's just take that to its most logical conclusion and just see, explore, like blow that up a little bit. So all the pieces in here were just me kind of, like things that I felt I had to do or were attracted to, or they were just kind of, it's a terrible way to go about it. If anybody here wants to be a nonfiction writer, do not do that. But I would, just like being almost like at a pottery wheel, and I would go out and grab the clay that I wanted from, wherever I would go and report this stuff, and kind of like spin it on the pottery wheel of my own insanity during the after hours, and then kind of, fire it and then send it out to whoever wanted it. It was first and foremost like the things that I were most passionate about. So yeah.
What else? Question over here. But you're getting interest now after this book, right?
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't that like people wouldn't like come at me with stuff. It was always like I would kindly kind of say no, just because if I felt the thing didn't. I mean, my tune is different now, obviously, but at that time it was because everything after like 2 or 3 pieces here, I kind of. Almost as if somebody like taps your shoulder when you're sleepwalking and you're like, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. So then everything after like the first 2 pieces in this book, I was like, yeah, I'm writing a book now. And so I wanted everything to go towards that at the time. But yeah, now like obviously you hope to make a life out of this, and you can't do that just doing the things that you want, and you have to be a professional. So yeah, no, that now like, now it is almost like an audition, this kind of thing. But yeah, now you get those lunches, you get those free editor lunches, nothing finer. Put the leftovers in a burlap sack and take them home,
Ken, I wanted to ask you about your piece on Amish baseball
Oh
players.
yeah, there you go.
I was, living in an age of just such professional sports, and kind of getting boring, the whole thing.
Right.
But there was something about the love of baseball. These young men, they weren't going to play professional ball, just playing for the sport of it.
Yeah.
That was really, endearing.
Yeah. Yeah, and, like that was a thing that, again, like I used to play baseball when I was a kid, not very well and not for very long. And I would always think about, in fact, that's like when I did try to write fiction one time, I like tried to write a terrible short story about like, why is it that at a certain age, at least I think, at a certain age, baseball becomes exponentially harder, if only because you're kind of much more self-conscious. Like you enter adolescence and you kind of have this ability to, you see yourself from the outside and all this other stuff. And, baseball is like, I can't remember what the quote is, but it's like, my favorite quote is just, John Kruk saying to a lady who was like, comport yourself better, Mr. Kruk, baseball player John Kruk, big fat guy, eating crab legs or whatever, beers all over his beard. And he's just saying, comport yourself. There's children here, Mr. Kruk. You're a professional athlete. He's just saying, I'm not an athlete, lady. I'm a ball player. And it's like anybody can play the game. it doesn't take much to be too good at it, but what it does take is like that kind of either like total self-assurance that like, it's either like 0 or 1, where you're totally so self-assured of yourself that you're like, I can do anything, and I know I'm going to be able to like make this backhanded grab and like turn and throw sidearm and nail the guy at first. Or it's like you completely like empty your head of everything and do almost like, like almost prayer-like repetitions in your head of like, okay, if he hits to like, this side with certain speed, here's what I'm going to do with 2 men on. And if he does that, and just like emptying yourself into every next pitch and looking at it that way and completely kind of obliterating that kind of consciousness. And so, when I was driving through Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I saw these Amish kids, and they were just terribly mechanically, just god awful. They were like holding the bat like this and stuff, but they were playing baseball really, really well, and it just didn't seem to make any sense. And so then I started reading about, their kind of relationship to, it's not that they're Luddites, but it's that they want to make sure that they shut out all these kinds of outside influences that would kind of like fracture this conception of themselves, of the world, of like their religious, kind of culture. And so it's about like keeping that kind of basic unity and things like that. So I just saw a lot of parallels there between like what it takes to be a good baseball player, in my opinion, and like how these people were viewing the world and maybe why they were good at baseball. And so I got to kind of play around with them and talk to them, and it was fun. That's the best thing about this, is you get to go do whatever interests you. Maybe someone pays you, most likely not, but it's the best. It's the best job you could possibly ask for, except when you're not getting paid for it. So,
Did I see a hand in the back? No?
my
All
guy's
right.
last chance. I'll never talk to any of you again.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
In your book, I felt off, and actually, you could even just, from the synopsis, it does, or maybe it was a biography on you, someone wrote his life was mainly napping.
Yeah, a lot of naps.
And in your book, I felt, and I don't read nonfiction often, so it was interesting because I do feel like I'm actually hearing the writer, right? Versus just disappearing into some other world.
Right.
And where was I going? Okay, I'm back.
Lots of naps.
Lots of naps.
Tons of naps.
So I feel this like maybe indirect notion of, this society tells you can do anything, or at least in our American society, and maybe you do, maybe you don't.
Right.
So you're so young and
Getting there, man.
coming from Miami, and we're all from Miami.
Getting
I'd like to know, and you're a teacher, and so am I, and so I'd like to know what you would tell students. You can curse if that's what you need to do, but what you would tell students if you could be honest and not worry about what the, principal might tell you.
You mean like if they wanted to like write
Just
stuff, or
not even, just about that right now, if, I'm sorry, I teach high school, and so there's a lot of identity crisis.
Okay.
And in your book, I felt that, like you were explaining a lot of how you felt in that crisis.
Right.
So if you could say anything, whether it's advice or not, what would you say?
Well, I think that's a good question insofar as like in Gable, like that napping stuff. So go back to like the napping stuff. Like I didn't read. I read like maybe 2 books in high school. Like even when we were taking like IB tests, where we had to read Life of Pi. Yeah. Anybody? I didn't read that, and I was just like not reading anything, right? And so like, but that wasn't necessarily because I didn't love it, but it was also just because like, like. There was something about like that like there was like almost this lacuna between like I used to love reading and writing when I was a kid, and then there was almost like a switch was flipped when we like hit puberty, when we like graduated from 7th grade to 8th grade, all of a sudden put down the books and like wrestle with Dennis, when we'd all gang up on Dennis and try to get him down to one knee. And like I guess I would say if I was talking to like young kids that like you don't like, I would mostly, rather than say anything, would just try to like figure out what their deal was and try to, or like who they were, or what kind of, like you're saying, identity crisis, what kind of, maybe how best to reach them through like a book or a voice, because like you say, like nonfiction is a little bit different than fiction insofar as like in this kind of stuff, it's like you're saying, like voice driven. And so while this isn't necessarily me in here, it's like in the way that a map is a scale model version of that person, like this is kind of a scale model version of me. And like I would hope that maybe somebody reads this and is like, wow, this guy kind of gets it, or like I kind of feel the same way, in the way that like you want to read a book and like hear as though like you're having a one-on-one with this other consciousness, and then you're like, oh man, like I'm making a connection that's like very unique and special in its own way. So I guess I wouldn't really necessarily tell them anything other than to be like, you know, this is my favorite thing, reading and writing. It's like, to me, the greatest thing in the world. That kind of like frisson you can feel while doing it like is unrivaled to me. It's almost like a religious experience. And so I just be like, you know, get to know the kid and then be like, this you may be into. Like maybe you're into this. Because I don't think, it wasn't that I didn't want to read in high school or in that like, you know, like pubescent kind of like cocoon state. And then I emerged a beautiful butterfly, obviously. But yeah, like I think it's not necessarily that like, you know, I don't believe that somebody's like, I don't like to read. Like I don't believe that for 1 second. And I think it's just, you know, you kind of like Dennis. This goes back to your question, like the like hilarious early Amazon reviews where the book gets like sent out to like, you know, people who normally review like cat furniture or something, where it's like this is like probably not for them. Like this voice and this content, probably not for them, you know, and that's fine. Like you don't have to like it. I'm cool with that. But the idea that like, you know, a kid doesn't like reading, like I probably would have been like, meh, I used to like to read, but now I really don't. That was a total lie. And it like took me like going to college and starting to find these other voices and other ways of doing it, like finding like what I hope people would think of like when they think of what I did here, like that kind of thing. Like finding the way to kind of like wedge that and pop it open is a long-winded way of answering your question. Yep, got one more.
So, Ken, I heard from my contacts that you'd gone upriver in Papua New Guinea
Yeah.
before Christmas.
Yes.
And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that. Like,
Sure thing.
What do you think's coming out of that? Were you looking to find someone in particular? Was it Colonel Kurtz?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I
Who's
went
gonna pick
native,
this
man. I went native. No, it was that talking about like what next and all that kind of stuff. It's like that was another idea born of, you know, I'm like sitting at home wondering, you know, interested in the idea of like pointing the finger at people, of scapegoating people, of witch hunts, of kind of a way of like purging a small community of whatever ails them through putting it on this other person. And so I just Googled and started like reading around and started like asking people like, are there still modern day witch hunts in the world? And it turns out there are a crap load of them in Papua New Guinea, where they kill hundreds, if not thousands of people every year. Publicly, they torture them and set them on fire and all this other stuff. And so, yeah, I found that it came to international attention in 2013, very briefly for like a week, where only because like this thing had been going on for quite a while, and that country itself hadn't necessarily been opened up, all of it, you know, until very recently. And people outside of that country found out about it because pictures were taken and uploaded to social media. And so there was a big firestorm about it internationally for like a week. And it like led to Papua New Guinea finally repealing a constitutional amendment that they had, saying it was okay for you to kill a witch. Like that was, you know, like you could actually like kill a witch in self-defense. But it still went on and on. So yeah, I headed over there and kind of helped save a witch a little bit with another lady. It was all very strange. Papua New Guinea is a strange place. But yeah, cause of much consternation. Yeah, just if you like tie it back to like this stuff, you know, every time I would go do something in this book, be it go camp out in like the gathering of the Juggalos, where Juggalos are classified by the FBI as like a criminal gang, or like go live on this man's desert island for 2 weeks or something like that. It was just you know, from my family, you're a dumbass, and why can't you, you know, no one wants to read about you getting killed. But it's never been like a big like adrenaline rush or anything. It's always been the idea of finding this thing and going to do the legwork, and then being able to, you know, through doing that story justice, like maybe talk about something else. So
What's that tat on your right arm?
oh God, that's me and my sisters.
Ah,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kent.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Lauren, Karen, there you go. Yeah.
Folks watching on the internet, there's still time to get the book, and we will send it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. For those of you here at the house, we have the book for sale at the counter in the front room over there. Kent's going to be signing over here at the table to the left of the podium. It's St. Patty's. We have the party outside, so buy a book,
go,
grab
guys.
a beer.
Now
Let's
we can-
give Kent Russell another hand. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.